Today I have two simple strategies to help manage your class with ease. One is for the whole class, while the other is for individual students, so that we can tap into students' intrinsic motivation as well as helping your students to think and act like a team. Now, I teach elementary school, but I'm telling you, these strategies can work for middle and high school as well. In fact, I used both of these strategies when I was teaching middle school music, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, so make sure you stick around. Let's begin with the individual behavior management strategy, and for this, I use dot cards. Here's how it works. Now, I love using simple materials for just about everything inside my classroom. And for this, all I do is I take index cards and I cut them in half. And what these do is just create a little dot card for my students to put on top of their desks. And that's just what I do. I just use some masking tape and I tape the dot card onto the corner of a student's desk. And then I just go around the room and put dots on the cards with a marker. Pretty simple, right? Now, I might give them for students who have their materials ready quickly, or if they're doing their work quietly, or if they're looking like they're highly engaged in their work. Maybe they're being respectful or responsible or kind or safe. Maybe they're making connections in the content or asking good questions or just persevering. Literally anything that they're doing that is showing that they are engaged in the content or doing well inside the classroom, I give them a dot. When you implement this strategy, be generous with your dots. Really, take the more the merrier type of approach to all of this. That way you can point out all the things that your students are doing, all the positive things that are happening inside your classroom, and not feel like you have to kind of pick and choose. That way you don't have to really think about, well, is this dot worthy? Instead, if it's really above and beyond, then give 2 or 3 dots. But really just giving a dot for just about anything. If a kid is doing what they're supposed to be doing, if it's worth noticing, then give them a dot, and even 2. So what does this do for the student? Well, it just gives them that ability to clearly see if they're on track or not. Right? It's like that visual cue that they're doing a good job so that they can keep on doing what they're doing. This is a form of positive reinforcement, right? Positive meaning you're adding something. In this case, it's a dot. And reinforcement that you want to increase the behavior that you're seeing. And this allows you to manage student behavior without talking, or at least not talking that much, because you can literally roam around the room with a marker in hand and just put dots on students' cards for any time you see someone doing what they're supposed to be doing. Pretty simple, right? If you like simple strategies like this, go ahead and hit the like button. So let's talk about some modifications, because I want these to work for you and how you like to teach. So one modification is that instead of you being the one that goes around and does all the dots, you can actually just stand in one spot and scan the whole classroom and see how kids are doing, and then just name off the kids who can put a dot or 2 on their cards. The kids really enjoy doing that. And if you have many different classes during the course of a day, instead of having the dot card taped to the desk, what you can do is maybe have the kids keep their dot cards inside of their class folder, or maybe their binder. Or you can even keep a little deck of cards for each individual class and just hand them out at the beginning of the class. They can put it in their spot where they sit, and then you can use them that way. When I taught middle school music, I actually had my students section off a part of the cover of their folder so that I could put a dot inside that section or ask a student to put it inside that section themselves. And of course, you can use any type of marker that you want, but if you want to get a little fancy, you can actually invest in these stamp markers that have a little stamp on the tip. So you may be wondering, what do you actually do with these dot cards after the students have collected a number of dots? So what I do is I have my students keep their dot cards all month and just rack up as many dots as they possibly can. And then I collect them all and count them and see who has the most dots for the month. And that's usually about, 4 to 7 kids who are kind of like the outliers who have really collected a lot more dots than the rest of the class. And I give them a homework pass. A different way to approach this is to have students collect a certain number of dots on their card. That's what we do in my math group. They keep their dot card inside their folder, and then once they get 20 dots, they can trade in their dot card for a prize from the prize box. Pretty simple. Here's another question I get from kids as well as teachers when it comes to this dot card strategy, and that is, can you really trust the kids to put their own dots on their cards? And you kind of have to figure out what you're comfortable with, right? You have to be able to trust your students to a certain degree, and if you do, then you can call out names and have them put their dots on their own cards. And if you suspect that there's some shenanigans going on, or sometimes your students will tell you if someone's not very trustworthy, then you can always pull back and be the one that has to go around and put dots on cards. And I'm often questioned about if this really does work for middle and high school students. And really, that depends on how you approach it, right? You know your teaching style the best, you know your students best, and you may be surprised at how this is actually motivating for middle and even some high school students to get a little dot or a stamp as a sign, a subtle sign that, they're just doing a good job. And there's definitely something about tapping into that youth that they remember, right? I know my mother used to teach high school, and she would always talk about how when she gave her high school kids stickers on their papers, they really got excited. And so doing these little things that are kind of reminiscent of their younger days, it's kind of fun. Okay, so now let's move on to a new strategy, and this one is for the whole class. I'll start by telling you the basics of it, but then I'm going to give you a whole bunch of modifications so that this will work for your classroom. So here's the basics, and you've probably heard of something very similar, okay? So you have a jar or a basket or some kind of container, and then things that you can put into that container. It might be beans, pom-poms, those little cubes from your math manipulatives, anything that's small that can be put into the container. So this strategy is pretty simple. You make a mark on the jar of what your goal is going to be, and then of course as a class you can decide what the reward might be if your class gets up to that line on the jar. And then anytime your class as a whole is doing something good or being amazing or just looking like they're learning something, you can go ahead and put a bean into the jar and let that level of beans get to the line. Pretty simple, right? Now from here, you can modify it in so many different ways. You may want to modify things depending on what your schedule is or what group of students you happen to have in front of you. For example, one modification is, along with adding to the jar, you can also take beans away from the jar. I really like this little twist because it's a great way to tell your class that you're disappointed with their behavior without raising your voice, which often does nothing anyway. Instead, you just can dramatically walk over to the jar or the container and take one of the things out. If you do go this route though, you may want to start with a little buffer. You may want to have 10 to 20 beans already inside your jar so that you don't end up with a negative. That can be a huge demotivator and it can really defeat the purpose. If you do see more classes during the day, you could have a jar for each class, or you could switch to a simple chart or piece of graph paper for each class. Then you can just add a mark onto a box inside the graph paper and kind of have like a dot card for the whole class. A few years ago, when my students were arranged in groups inside my classroom, I actually taped a cup to each cluster of desks. And when a group was working really hard, or were the first ones ready, or something like that. I would give a bean to that group, and that way the group worked really hard together to get themselves organized and ready and working. And it also gave a little bit of a competition, a little competitive vibe inside the classroom as well, to keep kids motivated. It actually worked out quite well. You can also use this strategy in yet another way, where each individual student can work towards the common goal of the class. For example, in my school, kids can earn PAW cards. And to be honest, I struggled for a long time with how to just keep track of all the PAW cards that my kids were earning individually. So I decided to change it up a little bit. Now, every time a kid earns a PAW card, they toss it into a big collection basket that we have, and then add a mark to our class's chart, just like adding a bean to the jar. And in this way, everyone is able to contribute to the common goal. And I gotta tell you, the kids are so happy with each other when they earn a PAW card and then can add it to the pile. There are so many ways that you can manage your classroom, and it doesn't begin or end with managing their behavior. Part of classroom management is also how you organize stuff. And that's what this next video is all about: practical ways to organize your classroom. Go ahead and check it out, and I will see you over there.